I'm Ryan Daws, editor of Developer, and with me is Charles Hoskinson, the founder of Cardano and CEO of IOHK. So Charles, can you just give me a brief overview of the Cardano project and what prompted you to start it?
Well, thank you for having me on, Ryan. Cardano is kind of my passion. I've been working on it for almost 6 years now, and it's kind of a clean slate approach to how to build a cryptocurrency and to how to build an open financial operating system. And so I've been in the cryptocurrency space for a long time. I've been trading and mining since 2011, and professionally, I've been in the space since 2013. So I've kind of witnessed the whole rise and fall of many altcoins, probably 8,000 of them at this point. I helped co-found Ethereum. And through this entire process, I accumulated a large workbook of question marks and things I'd like to resolve or research I'd like to do. So back in 2015, I got to a point where I said, hey, I have the ability to do a clean room approach where we just assume nothing exists, start from the science and first principles, and say, okay, with all that we know, how would we actually build a cryptocurrency if we could do it all over again? So we launched a very aggressive research agenda in partnership with the University of Edinburgh and Tokyo Tech and a lot of other institutions like University of Athens and a small army of PhDs. And we wrote now, I think, 92 research papers, a lot of which have been peer-reviewed at major academic venues like Crypto and CCS. And the papers started with foundational work, like what is a blockchain? What makes a blockchain secure? What is a smart contract programming language? How do you actually do resource models and accounting models and these types of things and so forth? And then they gradually built up the practical protocols, like, for example, our version of proof of stake or Boris with all the requisite security proofs. So we spent about 2 years doing that. And the idea was that once it's all done, we'd go and start implementing it, and we would target it towards the developing world. So we say, well, where's the demand for DeFi going to be? Where's the demand for decentralized finance in general? Well, that probably makes sense for people who are unbanked. And it probably makes sense for people who are in emerging economies that are growing very rapidly and they want to globalize, but they don't have identity infrastructure, property infrastructure, but they do have internet infrastructure. So in 2017, we launched the first version of Cardano. It hit market, very humble, called Byron. And over the last few years, we've been gradually upgrading it. And last year, we had the most significant upgrade in the project's history. It was called Shelley. We went from a static and federated system to a dynamic and decentralized system. And now we're actually the most secure, most decentralized proof of stake protocol on market. We have over 1,200 stake pools. I think of over 70% of the stake is delegated. And we're just about to launch the smart contract layer of the system. We've been systematically launching infrastructure. Back in December, we did a hard fork for it. We're just about to do a hard fork here in February for it. And that'll allow us to actually test out all these wonky, cool DeFi ideas and DApp ideas that we've been percolating for the last 5 years. So it's a bit of a project of passion, and it's also a bit of a scientific project, but it's also a very real commercial project with a clear market demand and need. We've been in Ethiopia for 3 years. We've been all throughout Africa, throughout Eastern Europe, and places like Georgia, for example, Southeast Asia, places like Mongolia. So it's give me opportunity to travel. I've been to, I think, 52 countries now, and the only reason I haven't been to more is that COVID locked this all down. But the world has definitely received it. We have almost 1 million people in our ecosystem and hundreds of thousands of active wallets. We're trading on more than 30 plus exchanges, and we've consistently been in the top 10 for cryptocurrencies, and that's just the beginning. The other thing about Cardano is I believe it's the first, what I call a third generation cryptocurrency. So outside of the first principles stuff, which is unique to Cardano, there's a lot of cryptocurrencies that are looking to solve 3 things at the same time. They're trying to achieve scale, they're trying to be interoperable, and they're trying to be sustainable. So in terms of scale, they want a situation where you can sustainably have millions or billions of users. In terms of interoperability, you'd like a situation where your cryptocurrency can talk to the 8,000 other cryptocurrencies and the legacy financial systems, because a lot of them are not going away. And then finally, in terms of sustainability, you have to kind of resolve the who pays and who decides. How do you pay to maintain the cryptocurrency, the infrastructure around it, and grow the ecosystem once you've gone past the founders? And then also, how do you vote to fork the system? Because the problem is, the larger the system gets, the harder it is to change things. So the system kind of gets locked in, like Bitcoin has. And as a result, even if there are really good ideas and really good innovations that could add tons of value to everybody, the bureaucracy of the system prevents you from evolving and upgrading. You become too slow. So you need to be able to manage not only your growth, but also have it as a net benefit instead of a net slowdown. So we have protocols for all three of those areas. Ouroboros, for example, is our scalability approach, and it's been a long research agenda. We've invented a lot of sidechain protocols for interoperability, and we, for example, formalized sidechains for proof of work through a primitive called NIPAPAUs. And we've been working on the treasury model and the voting model for over 4 years out of Lancaster and a litany of other universities. And we've got to a point where we've already started a voting system that has over 5,000 active participants at the moment, and it's growing geometrically. So it looks like we're actually going to pull off the crazy research agenda that we started over 6 years ago. It's been pretty fun.
Yeah, I've been very jealous of some of your adventures. I've seen you traveling all over the globe via your Twitter account, which I've followed for a while. You've answered my next question, really, which is why developers should choose to build on Cardano over Ethereum. I guess it's addressing those trilemma problems of scalability and the security and all of those things.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. That's a very good question, and I haven't quite gotten into enough of a detail about it. So first off, dApp developers are businesses. You know, they're building a dApp because they want to accomplish something. They want to solve a particular problem. And cryptocurrencies are infrastructure. So, you know, you should look to Ethereum and Cardano like you look at Rackspace and look at Amazon and look at DigitalOcean and these types of things. So it's kind of silly if you say, well, you can only build on Amazon. It's like, no, you know, you as a developer should care about a collection of things. Your software lifecycle, you should care about predictability of cost. You know, how much is it going to cost you to run on that infrastructure year one, year two? You should care about user experience as you scale from thousands of users to millions of users. And then obviously, yes, you have to care about the security of the underlying infrastructure, of course. And you also have to think about your development experience and how do you deliver a secure experience to your customers. And furthermore, these applications, they don't just live in the cryptocurrency space. They're hybrid applications. Some of them live on blockchain and some of them live off of a blockchain. And so as a consequence, when you look at all of these things, it turns out that Ethereum is not really a good experience for all of them. It doesn't have predictable cost. The on-chain, off-chain stuff is still a bit muddled to a point where people are putting a lot of their stuff in off-chain infrastructure like Infura. You have not exactly the best development experience, although it's gotten considerably better in the last 24 months. And there's a lot of other little problems that have leaked in. And that's okay. You know, they were the first mover, and it's kind of like saying, hey, building a website on Internet Explorer 6 or Netscape, is that going to be a great experience? Probably not. You know, you have to use Flash and all this other weird wonky stuff to be able to do something. And then you give up a lot of stuff like SEO and so forth. So the point of a clean slate platform is that it should be able to give you what the incumbents have, meaning anything they've accomplished, we need to be able to do. But then it needs to be able to open up new realms and new possibilities and also broaden the set of people who can participate. The problem is that there are 22.4 million developers, but I think only about 80,000 Solidity developers are floating around. And actually of them, I think only around 10,000 or so are active, you know, doing something in the space. So the totality of all developers aren't playing or doing much in the cryptocurrency space. They're writing .NET applications, Node applications, Java applications, and these types of things. And so the first thing we said is it possible to create a framework that over time can bring all of these mainstream programming languages into our space for both the off-chain infrastructure and the on-chain infrastructure, and do that in a safe, sustainable way with predictable cost. So we launched a project out of University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, with a professor named Grigori Roshu, who runs a company called Runtime Verification. And they work with DARPA and NASA, and they work with Boeing and these other large companies. And they're experts in formal methods, and they're experts in virtual machines and compilers and programming languages and so forth. And for 15 years, they've been working kind of this universal meta language called K. And basically what K is all about is it allows you to describe the semantics of a programming language. And then over time, it can be used to build all your tooling. It can be used to build compilers. It can be used to build all these things. And as you upgrade your programming language, like when you go from F#4 to F#5 or Scala 2 to Scala 3, you could just automatically upgrade your infrastructure without a human being writing a single line of code. So we invested millions of dollars into building out a virtual machine specifically for this. It's called Yella, and we're bringing that to market with Cardano probably late first half, early second half of this year is what we're tentatively looking at. And basically what that's going to allow us to do is start capturing mainstream programming languages, the JavaScripts, the C#, the Javas, and bringing them into the Cardano ecosystem. So if you're a developer there, you can start writing smart contracts. You can start writing dApps, and you also have a clear way of doing deployments for your on-chain and off-chain code. Then there are domain-specific languages which are built specifically to do a particular task and do it very well, do it very securely, and also do it without a lot of programming knowledge. So for example, we've created a language called Marlowe for our ecosystem, and that's specifically for financial contracts. It's kind of looking at things like legacy languages like FPML and so forth. And there you say, hey, I want to do an escrow with a multi-sig, and here are the parties, and I'd like it to execute after this date. If you're writing all that in Solidity or Python or something, it's a lot of work. And also you're bound to make a mistake. And if you do, there's a backdoor in your contract, like the parity multi-sig bug, and then suddenly everything gets stolen. Well, what if you could just build it with bricks, like in a very visual interface, and just plug Lego bricks together and say, okay, here's all the stuff, and automatically generates the code. It uses a SAT solver and other things to prove that the code is correct. And then you don't have a parity multi-sig bug. You don't have any of these issues. It's just there. You can also co-design the contract with a financial expert, not a programmer. So you're broadening the base of people who can participate. So we are starting to build DSLs for Cardano. Marlowe is the first one for that. And then we also need a general purpose binding language. So we created something called Plutus, which is based on Haskell, and it's a native language of the Cardano main network. And that's really for professional programmers who want to write high assurance code. So when you have an app that absolutely can't fail, billions of dollars is at risk, there's going to be a lot of tooling and infrastructure in that ecosystem where you can pick it up and use 30 plus years of best practices from the Haskell ecosystem to write the same kind of code that you would write for the braking software of a high-speed train, or for the engine software for a Rolls-Royce engine in a Boeing plane or something like that, and allow you to get a lot of certainty that your code is right. And then finally, Ethereum is the market standard for smart contracts. So we made sure to be Ethereum interoperable. So we kind of call this the ocean, the pond, and the island. We view Ethereum as kind of an experimental pond where there's this Cambrian explosion of ideas. It makes no sense to walk away from that. There's over 3,800 great dApps that are in that pond. The ocean is all the programming languages, and then the island is kind of what we term for Plutus and Marlowe, and that's like this perfect utopia where if you can live there, you can write amazing, magical things, and they're going to work really well. And we'd like to do all of this with predictable costing, great development experience, and lots of good tools, and a lot of collaboration with the developers. So we'll be making a series of announcements throughout the coming months, and we already have devnets up, and in March we should have the Plutus testnet up. And then we're just going to keep bringing more developers, more firms, and so forth in. And throughout this whole year, we're going to be building up that ecosystem. And we think it's going to be quite competitive with what's in the market.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the whole space is still very young. And there's, of course, as you said, plenty of room for many different blockchain platforms to coexist. And you're right to acknowledge that Ethereum is currently in the lead. It's still a very sort of tiny proportion of what the whole blockchain industry can disrupt. I mean, obviously decentralized finance is the sort of big thing for blockchain at the moment. And I mean, compared to the traditional finance industry, I mean, blockchain has only just taken a very, very small slice of it. So Cardano has been the most active project in the space. If you look at your GitHub, you've been developing on it constantly now for many years. It's one of the oldest projects I can think of, especially one that's still around. Many of them have collapsed. So why has it taken so long for you guys to launch smart contracts?
Well, we had to write new programming languages and new accounting models from scratch. And whenever you write a new programming language, that takes a few years. We also did a lot of foundational PL research because we really wanted to understand what is a smart contract programming language. So it wasn't just, hey, let's go do something, release something. We started from first principles, and we hired people who actually write programming languages for a living. Like the leader of the Plutus project is Phil Wadler, along with Mimo Chakravarti. People remember that Wadler was the creator of the Haskell programming language and worked on probably a dozen programming languages throughout his career and made meaningful contributions everywhere from Go to Java. There's all this lore in the PL space, like, hey, why does Scala have this? Well, we had a conversation with Phil Wadler and he recommended it. It's like, oh, okay, we'll go with it. So we brought some really serious, high caliber people in, and we said, do it right. So we don't want it just a language. Let's take a step back and really understand what problems are you trying to solve with smart contracts and what problems aren't you trying to solve, so you can get the right balance between off-chain and on-chain. The other thing is we really wanted to think about the accounting model, because at some point you got to shard, at some point you need to move transactions off-chain. And it turns out that the model that Bitcoin uses is almost right. You just need to extend it. The accounts model is not. In fact, the model that Ethereum uses, Tezos uses, and these other systems use really is hard to shard. And so the longer you live with that, the harder and harder it's going to be to go parallel. UTXO, super easy to shard, and you don't need a global state. You just have a local state for what your area of concern is. It's just you have to extend it to do more. So it was really hard for us to figure out how much extension was required for UTXO. So we had to invent an entirely new accounting model from scratch. And then we were really curious, is that accounting model equivalent to the accounts model that Ethereum uses? In other words, can you move value back and forth between these systems, or will something be lost? So we had to come up with a paper called Chimeric Ledgers that proved that they were. So there was a lot of infrastructure and background work that was needed to be done. And that took years. And we did it in a very rigorous way that's recognizable to any professional programming languages. So we actually wrote formal semantics. We proved some things in AGDA. We had to redesign the language. I think Plutus was redesigned about 18 times, 19 times. So there was a lot of iterations there. But that's great because we were saving the developers a lot of heartache and pain. If you look at Solidity, it came out quickly, but it's already gone through an enormous amount of versions, and they had to save their developers a lot of heartache and pain through iterating gradually. Meanwhile, you have the DAO hack, and meanwhile, you have all these other things. And there were a lot of do-overs that I think they would like to have. And unfortunately, you have to live with the sins of your language after you've released it. JavaScript is the greatest example in history of that. They wrote it too quickly, less than 54 days, I think. And we spent, as an industry, 15 years cleaning up JavaScript to a point where it's actually a useful programming language. I mean, it was so bad for a while that people were creating like meta languages, supersets like TypeScript and Dart and CoffeeScript to try to get away from JavaScript because it just could not be used for enterprise-grade applications. And eventually they got their act together and put in classes and big arrows and these types of things to get JavaScript to a point where you could write maintainable code. We didn't want to inflict, because billions of dollars are at stake, those sins into our community. We said instead, let's do it right the first time, and then all the iteration can be about better libraries, better tooling, some more syntactic sugar, and things that developers want, perhaps better specification languages and these things, instead of how do you fix the core language. We'd like the core language to be used again and again. And the advantage we had is that we kind of started from a very good place. Haskell was created in 1985 by a committee, and they've spent more than 30 years carefully thinking about, well, how do we improve it? And we had the hindsight of all these old language designers who are now their 60s, who like had to live with all the sins they've committed in programming language design. And they say, okay, we're not going to do that again. That was a horrible mistake, and let's not go through that pain. And that's just beautiful. We've just saved our community so much by going down that road. And so what does it mean? It means for you, the developer, now that that's almost there, you're going to have much more concise code. You'll have a better testing experience. And ultimately, you'll be able to write more productive apps with a better life cycle with those applications. Okay, so that means it's easier to maintain. Your development team is smaller. You have higher developer productivity, And these are all things that developers really care about and executives really care about, because they have to release software with predictable timelines, predictable costs. They have to use this thing called agile. They have story points and burn down charts and these things. So you'd like to know that the platform is working with you instead of against you. So we took a very first principles approach to that. The other thing is that we had to be interoperable with the incumbents. And the problem was that the incumbents made almost no effort to formalizing anything. So one of the first things that we did is we actually paid to have the Ethereum virtual machine formalized. We had this yellow paper, but nobody actually wrote down formal semantics. So we funded the KEVM project, and we actually wrote the first set with runtime verification. They did the work, we paid the money to formalize the Ethereum virtual machine. And then after we did that, we knew where all the bodies were buried, like what was the good, the bad, and the ugly of this virtual machine and that execution model. And then from that, they built Yella, which is the execution model for the ocean for all of the programming languages. So there's a vastness to the smart contract strategy of Cardano that is absent with all of these other projects. Usually what they do is they say, let's start with WebAssembly, and then, okay, we'll just figure it out from there. Then you have to build a resource model and a memory model and all this stuff. And then as you're adding it in, you make mistakes, and then you spend 5 years, 6 years in market fixing those, and your gas fees are never right, and these other things are never right. Meanwhile, who suffers? The DeFi space suffers, your customers suffer. The problem is the financial incentives are a little perverse. You get paid up front, and then you get to sell at the top. So you're not really paid in a traditional sense for quality or for whether it works or not. And so that's why we see the mistakes we've seen in the industry. But we said, that's immoral, that's wrong. Take a step back, do it right. And look, when it comes, developers are going to flood in, and we'll be able to catch up for whatever lost ground in 12 to 24 months. And we'll just surpass all of it. It's kind of like when Apple did their do-over. They did Objective-C. They weren't super happy with it. And then they moved over to Swift. And they're like, okay, this is the way. We're very happy with this now, and we think this ecosystem is good. And the iOS development ecosystem is great as a consequence.
Yeah, I mean, you can't use the traditional Silicon Valley ethos of moving fast and breaking things with this space because of, I mean, blockchain should be all about trust, especially if people are going to put their money into it. I mean,
Right.
it can't be something that, is going to be flawed and break on you. Because that's something that's hard to build that trust again later.
Yeah, and
So,
as a final point to that, whether you like what we've done or not like what we've done, we've paid the price. We had to spend 4 years doing it, so it's done. So it's coming out soon, and you finally get to use it. So we'll see if the strategy worked or not, but it's not like we have to wait another 4 years to find that out. We're going to find out this year.
well, I don't think that you're exactly being left behind. Like I said, I mean, the space is still small. Really, even Ethereum, with all of its
Yeah.
decentralized applications, it's still really only a small percentage that's, actually active and using that money. And you only need to pour a few of those across to, really get some traction. So on that line, the K Ethereum virtual machine, the devnet has just gone live for that. So what is that allowing developers to do, and how's it going?
Well, anything you can do on Ethereum, you can do on that. So if you want to take the Celsius smart contract, you can take and go and compile it and run it on the DevNet. It's 100% backward compatible with Ethereum. So really, this is first a testing framework to get a sense of costings and also get a sense of portability. So we have things like the ERC20 converter and other projects, and these are all about porting stuff from Ethereum to Cardano. And it'll just run better, faster, and cheaper on our system versus their system. So that's really the point of that DevNet, is to begin those conversations, get all the kinks out, and then what will happen is we'll upgrade the DevNet to a permanent sidechain, and then that sidechain will run connected to the Cardano mainnet. So when you deploy apps, you can reuse that code for Cardano's mainnet. You don't have to go over and learn Plutus and build on new infrastructure and so forth. You can still stay in the Ethereum ecosystem. It'll just run better, faster, and cheaper on our side. And that'll be a permanent side chain, so we'll keep upgrading it. So as the Ethereum virtual machine upgrades, as the Solidity infrastructure upgrades these things, we'll just keep upgrading and staying with it. And maybe we'll add an S2 side chain. It's not that hard, but it just runs better on Cardano. It's kind of like remember when Mac they created Boot Camp and you could run Windows on a MacBook. For the longest time, the best Windows laptop was actually a MacBook Pro.
So are
Yeah.
you expecting many projects to jump from Ethereum to Cardano this year? Have you already begun discussions with some some projects?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that have already announced, for example, like SingularityNet, and we haven't been looking too hard because we're still doing some basic infrastructure stuff, but we're almost where we need to be, and we're certainly in discussions. Like I think Alex Mashinsky made it publicly known in our recent interview that Celsius is looking for a new home. I think he's getting tired of paying $2.5 million a year in transaction fees, and so he wants to go somewhere else. So there's a lot of these conversations of not just existing dApps, but also bigger companies that are interested in entering the space, and they're looking for a better home than what Ethereum can provide them. And that will accelerate very rapidly. We don't think we're going to have any problem with conversion of dApps over to our system. What gets me more excited is the merger of the markets we've been playing in for years, like Ethiopia and other places, with DeFi. So when we say, hey, why would a peer-to-peer lending service or a peer-to-peer insurance or a stable coin want to come to Cardano? Well, because we're going to be giving them the customers that they actually need. Not a 25-year-old kid living in his mom's basement in New Jersey. We're giving him like a whole village in Ethiopia. These are people that have no bank accounts and they're rapidly building wealth and they desperately need to globalize. And so when they get into your DeFi ecosystem, it's like you're the next JP Morgan Chase. They're gonna be loyal to your standard and you're the brand. You're not displacing anybody. You're the first mover in these marketplaces. And collectively, these markets are huge. They're worth trillions of dollars, and most of the people, about 70%, are at or under the age of 30, and they're internet enabled and very savvy and aware. And they've already been indoctrinated for non-sovereign currencies because of things like M-Pesa and so forth. And they don't really like capital controls, and their sovereign money's crap. So you don't really have to sell them on crypto. They're like, yeah, it's better than what we got, and it's global. So I can give it to anybody in the world. So when you're a developer, you don't ask, well, where are the customers today? You also ask, where are the customers going to be in 5 years or in 10 years or 15 years? And how do I capture that? So it's kind of like being in China in the 1980s, where everybody knew it was going to be big. If you got in early and really smart about it, you could ride that growth curve as China went up exponentially. Africa looks this way, as does Eastern Europe, as does Southeast Asia. And that's the other USP to Cardano. It's kind of a non-development USP. It's that we're going to have, because of government relationships and the fact that these contracts bring hundreds of thousands or millions of users into our system for a single thing like identity management or something, you can now have a customer base and actually sell things to people that are going to be around for a long time, and you can grow with them. So I think that's also very compelling for dApp conversion. As a final point, dApps are becoming multi-chain. So it's kind of silly when people get so locked into infrastructure, but everybody wants to run on multiple pieces of infrastructure, and they want the native host infrastructure to be as low cost as possible. It's very clear that Ethereum is no longer competitive on cost, and Vitalik is the first to admit that, which is why he's building Eth2. So there is an exodus because of cost reasons from Ethereum to other systems. And what we offer is this beautiful interoperability. So you don't have to leave your customers behind there. You can kind of come over here, run it on a Cardano, but still interface with Ethereum and other systems. And these are the kinds of commercial discussions we're having. And all throughout the year, we'll be exploring it. And I think we'll be quite competitive as we close out this year.
Yeah, I have noticed you have a very admirable focus on those emerging countries as well as sort of innovations in the developed nations, which is great to see. So speaking of Cardano's interoperability developments, I believe that you're making your own oracles. Do you think that that will be the main solution used for you, or do you think the third-party projects like ChainLink will continue to play a big role?
Well, we're agnostic to oracles. And so what we're trying to do is build an oracle framework and make it very easy for third-party providers to plug their oracles in. And we have some preferred partners that we've been exploring oracles with, like, for example, Wolfram. They're actually one of the largest data suppliers for the smart contract space. Wolfram Alpha is an amazing engine. You can query and say, how many shipwrecks have happened in Florida between 1950 and 2000 as a result of a hurricane, and had more than $1 million worth of cargo loss, and it'll give you an answer. And you're just like, wow, that's incredible. So that's a great engine to plug in, but there are many great engines to plug in. And frankly, the point of an oracle is to bring external information into the system. Okay. But then you have many, many questions. What's the reliability of that information? How much does it cost me to get it in? Can it be censored at inconvenient times? Can it be given in ways that bias it towards my competitors or, a counterparty or something like that? And the point of frameworks like ChainLink are to try to address a lot of those problems in aggregation and veracity and availability and so forth. So the market needs standards like that. And it makes no sense to go and say, well, we can just come up with a universal standard to succumb everybody and it'll just conquer everything. I mean, sure, we'll find ways to compete where it makes sense, but it makes a lot more sense for the platform to be agnostic and provide frameworks to make it easy for that to be routed and plugged in. One of the things that's really cool is that we have kind of two-layer infrastructure in Cardano. We have the regular users, but then we have the stake pools. And what's nice about that heterogeneity is those stake pools are like enterprise users. They're on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have professional hosting infrastructure. They're usually a lot more powerful, the computing infrastructure, than a normal user, a lot of storage and so forth. So that's a perfect layer to act as a service layer to batch Oracle feeds and have smart contracts query and so forth. And also you can federate these things so that you have availability. So even if one of them tries to censor or a group of them tries to censor a data feed, the majority won't. And as a consequence, you always have access to it. So it's a very complex problem, but it's a prerequisite to useful smart contracts. So you can't ignore it. And it's absolutely necessary for utility in the system, or because you need to operate on data that's external to your system. And it's something we think a lot about. And we're going to follow kind of a build and buy strategy there. We're going to build some stuff internally. And then, of course, we're going to encourage external providers to give access to their stuff into our system.
So more generally, what are your predictions for the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry this year? I mean, a lot of people are obviously saying that it's in a bubble and it's all about to pop and collapse. What are your thoughts?
It's always a bubble, right?
Yep.
It's crazy. The Fed prints $6 trillion last year in the United States. And I asked myself, why do I even pay taxes anymore? I mean, honestly, they can if they can print $6 trillion a year and say there's no inflation and it doesn't have any impact, it would just print money then. There's no reason to pay taxes. There's no reason to do anything. So the modern monetary theory is a road to nowhere. And I think the real collapse is going to be the modern banking system. And I think the real collapse is going to be the fiat currencies. We've already seen tremendous deterioration in buying power for the US dollar. I mean, just look at the price of wood. Simple things like lumber, oil, things like the price of gasoline. Unless there's a lot of effort to keep them down, they have been going up 20%, 30%, 40%. The cost of rent, these times we're in a pandemic depression and rent's still going up in many places because of inflation, whereas wages do not. So this is not a sustainable economy. And so crypto is the escape hatch. People are saying, wait a minute here. In an age of negative interest rates, no yield on bonds, subpar investments, and high inflation, why the hell do I keep my money in fiat? Let me go over to crypto. And the minute when all these people go over to crypto, the first thing the media starts printing over and over again is, it's a bubble, it's a bubble, it's a bubble. Hang on a second here. If you have an enterprise with tens, if not hundreds of millions of people involved who are putting their money into it, building infrastructure and using it for real life utility, that's not a bubble, that's an economy. Mm-hmm. And to pretend like that is a bubble is a crazy, crazy thing. Now, the specific price is way up, way down. There's a lot of micro and macro factors behind that. It's really hard to predict whether these price levels are sustainable or they'll regress a bit. We'll keep building and then they build up again. So there's a world of difference between 2017 and 2021. In 2017, we were at $20,000 Bitcoin. 2021, we were at $20,000 plus Bitcoin. But look at the size of the environment. We probably have 3 or 4 times as many people in Bitcoin, 3 or 4 times as many companies in the cryptocurrency space, and 4 years of technological progress and a whole bunch of new things lifting all of this up. So in many ways, I think that's much more sustainable than where 2017 existed. And also look at the top 10. All the projects in the top 10 have massive teams behind them, massive ecosystems behind them, and they're actually doing real and interesting things. This was not the case in 2017. This was not the case in 2015 or any of these other ages. There was a lot of Me Too coins, which they were just around and they were copies of a copy of a copy. and somehow they had a $2 billion, $3 billion market cap. Made no sense at all. So I think the market's fundamentally different. The demographics are fundamentally different. And I think people are starting to wise up that the way the world economy is running is just not sustainable. The other thing is we have a lot more institutional investors in cryptocurrency today, like Saylor, like big funds and so forth, and a lot of central banks that are taking cryptocurrency positions. So given that smart money is coming in, and government-backed money and sovereign wealth funds are coming in and so forth, that's a very different dynamic than a bubblish retail surge. We saw the exact same thing happen post 1990s with the internet companies. In the 1990s, most of those surges were speculative by retail investors, and of course, they weren't sustainable. Then in the 2000s, people started rebuilding, and as market caps started going back up, you'd find that the holders of those stocks were less and less mom and pop, and they were more and more large mutual funds or big investment funds and so forth. And then suddenly there was a lot more sustainability and solidity in the stock prices, and they were able to then build upon that. So I think the facts and circumstances are very different now, and I think the market is going to be much stronger now. Now, that's not to say we couldn't see a 50%, 60% collapse. I mean, I've been in crypto for 8 years now. I've been through, I think, 7 boom bust cycles. I remember when Bitcoin was $1, and then it went all the way up to $30, and then it collapsed to $4. And we're like, oh God, this is the worst thing ever. And then it went from $4 to $250, and then it went down to 80. Then it went up to 1,200. Then it went down to 250 and sat there for a while. Then it went up to 20,000. Then it went to 4,000. Now it's at what, 36 or whatever. So I've seen so much, and it wouldn't surprise me to see regression to 10,000 or 15,000, but it wouldn't surprise me to see a surge to 50,000 or 100,000. I think our time has come because of the malfeasance and incompetence of the current monetary policy of the central banks.
Yeah, this is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That pretty much all the projects left now are ones that are actually genuinely making a difference and building good things. And all these institutions are coming in. You've got Grayscale that are buying up more Bitcoin than is actually being mined. And so all these things, to me, not a financial expert, but say it's very much not a bubble at this point. But trust is, of course, more of an issue in society right now than ever, with the banks, with their monetary policies, with governments, democratic practices. Do you think blockchains can help to restore some of that trust?
They have to. Faith in institutions is at an all-time low, and it's creating catastrophic consequences. Like yesterday, I just did a video on vaccinations. And I said, wow, it's incredible that Israel is almost at a 30% vaccination rate. So imagine the world 6 months from now. That's basically where Israel is at. And if they continue this velocity, there is a good chance by March to April that Israel could actually have vaccine-induced herd immunity. What does this mean for the world? It means that by studying that data, we're going to know everything. We're going to know whether the vaccines provide sterilizing immunity. We're going to know whether community spread of COVID is possible with a 70% vaccination rate. We're going to know, what the mortality rate is post-vaccination and so forth. And if that data, if they look good, it gives us hope that we can all be out of COVID by the end of the year. So you'd figure that would be great news and people would be very excited about it. I did the video. 90% of the comments are negative or anti-vax. Why? Because people legitimately believe that these things are poison. They see the havoc COVID's caused, and either they ignore it or they think that it's all made up or it's overrated or something. It's like more than 1 million people have died. My country alone, 400,000. I know people have died. My parents, my dad is a doctor, my brother's a doctor. They take care of COVID patients, and they see people come in and they eventually leave the ICU and their lungs are destroyed for the rest of their lives. They're like a COPD patient or something like this. This is a horrible disease. And we can't even agree on basic facts. Why? Because people don't trust institutions. And rightfully so, because institutions have been lying to them again and again and again. Our mass media lied to them about Iraq, lied to them about a lot of major events, lied to them about the stability of markets and so forth, and they keep getting screwed. So say, well, why this time are you being honest? And then governments lie all the time, and they make a policy to do that. Oh, the people don't have a right to know. They don't have a right for transparency and so forth. So in whatever institution you can pick, it can be the American Dental Association, it can be the US government, it can be the Bank of England. You poll people, and you're going to find that people don't trust it more often than not. So the point of blockchain, the point of our industry is basically restoring trust through decentralization. So you take a step back and you say, okay, how do we build a system that can't lie, not shouldn't lie, or there are consequences for lying, but can't lie about things, and that there's a lot of auditing and checks and balances, and the incentives are towards honesty and transparency instead of collusion and deception and dishonesty. Now that may work great for just money, but honestly, that's going to work even better for all of our social institutions, our voting, our property ledger, the maintenance of our identity, contractual agreements, these types of things. So that's why I'm so bullish on this industry, is that it's not just about building a token and watching that token go up in value. This is about the fundamental re-architecture and reinvention of society as we know it. And what's going to happen is governments that are most in need of restoration of credibility are going to be the first adopters, which is why I'm so keen about the developing world. That's one of the reasons why people don't put money into these markets, despite the fact that they grow at 15% per year and the demographics are very promising, is they don't trust the rule of law and they don't trust the sovereign government. They say these guys default all the time, the government changes all the time, I'm going to get wiped out. Well, guess what? If you put blockchain style infrastructure in, they go from, well, we have to trust the government to, we don't have to trust anybody. The infrastructure just works, the values preserved, these types of things. So I think that's a huge component. It's a necessary component to restoring faith in institutions, but it's not sufficient. There's a lot more stuff that has to happen. And unfortunately, we're still getting very siloed and fractured. And people are very propagandized right now and very radicalized right now on all sides of the spectrum. And we're no longer able to agree on basic facts, and people aren't able to think critically. There's cognitive damage that's happened to society, and it's making it very difficult for people to discern fact from opinion, opinion from fiction. And they just lump everything together, and they go into these very strange narratives of my people are good, your people are evil, wherever they sit in the political spectrum. And that's very problematic.
Yeah, and I mean, they say that there's an app for everything these days, but there's not a decentralized app for everything, which is where what I think is quite exciting and a big growth opportunity for developers. I mean, obviously, Trump's suspension from Twitter was, a big topic. I'm all for free speech. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I agree with everyone's right to, say what they want. So I feel like decentralized versions of apps like Twitter provide a huge growth opportunity, and I presume that that's something that you're wagering on.
Well, what's interesting is, the argument was, well, these are private companies and they can do whatever they want. And there's some truth to that. On the other hand, when private companies collude and then end up controlling an entire market, we have a term for that. It's called a monopoly. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason why we have the Sherman Antitrust Act. There's a reason why we broke up the monopolies wherever we saw them, because the social consequences to monopolies are stagnation and also overwhelming control in the hands of a few who are unelected and unaccountable to the general public. So the oil of the 21st century is information and data. And if a cartel can form together and control the flow of it, the pricing of it, and the access to it, that's hugely problematic for society. So the issue wasn't Trump's deplatforming, because, it's a private network, okay. The issue was that the platform he was going to go to was deplatformed and not allowed to fairly compete. What occurred was that Twitter got with Facebook, got with Google and these other companies like Amazon, and they systematically deplatformed a competitor to Twitter in order to prevent that competitor from existing. So, so how can you have free speech? How can you have competition when 100% of the market colludes against you and prevents you from having access to anyone's cell phone, having a website, and so forth? And then what they do is they propagandize people and say, well, this was a good thing because we're preventing terrorism, we're preventing hate speech. I got news for you. 99% of all of the terrorist collaboration and hate speech and planning, especially for the Capitol riot, was done on Facebook and on Twitter. So even though they have moderation policies by their scale, they were just simply too big. And as a consequence, that slipped through. So they're using a red herring to justify not just deplatforming, but anti-competitive behavior that prevents the incumbents from losing their monopolies. Hugely problematic to society, and it's only going to go further. So eventually they're going to start implementing social policy with this. And they'll say, if we don't like the demographics of your company or how much you pay your employees, you can't get a website. You can't be in the Google App Store. Private company, we can do whatever we want. So everything the government's always wanted to do, but constitutionally has been restricted, they can now just push through a public-private partnership to these oligarchy of private companies to control everything. So the only amelioration for this decentralization, we need to decentralize app stores. We need decentralized access to our phones. Closely related to that right to repair movement, there's a right to open phones, right to open ecosystems. Walled gardens are horrible for society. Every time we've done it, it's hurt us. It's regressed technological progress and been anti-competitive. And then we also need good platforms. Now, you need also effective platforms. I've done series of videos on this where I've talked about, hey, it's not good enough to have decentralized Twitter, because the bigger problem is the way we communicate with each other. If all we do with decentralized Twitter is silo up and only listen to opinions we like, don't diversify, and there's no information flow between people, all you're doing is building a more resilient radicalization engine. So as people join, they go from moderates to radicals in one political direction or the other political direction. That solves no problems, and it's bad for society. So you need a system that de-radicalizes people and makes them more open, gets rid of Dunning-Kruger, it makes them challenge and question their ideas. And you need a system where the incentives and design is built in a way for people to vet and verify information, to listen to alternative sources, and for ideas to flow between different cliques. And I've done some videos, whiteboard videos, kind of explaining some ideas we have. And we have a whole group of people that do think about this. And there's a lot of people thinking about this in academia, from Cornell to Stanford to MIT and so forth, because they're really worried about the consequences of social media creating radicalization. And they say, how the hell do we get out of this? The other thing is you need to create incentives for decentralized fact-checking and information curation. Because the problem is, if you just hand out fact-checking to 5 actors, they become like the commissars, the Ministry of Information that we saw, you know, in every one of the Soviet republics, and they get to decide what's true and what's not true. That's horribly damaging to society, especially when it's in the hands of an ideologically, directed private company. Real bad deal. And if you support it, just take a step back and imagine, how would you feel if the Ku Klux Klan were your fact checkers? And you say, oh, that's obviously wrong. Well, what if half of society feels that the existing fact checkers are just as bad as those guys? Do you think they're going to be moderate? No, they're going to get radicalized by those beliefs. And it's not a solution just to call them bad actors and horrible human beings and throw tar on them and say, grow up. They turn to violence at some point. So you can't solve the problem that way. So if we were to enter the decentralized media space, social media space, we'd only do so if we had the dual solution. How do you de-radicalize people? And how do you create incentives for proper information curation and sharing and flow? And how do you make sure that it's true decentralized system where it's very resilient and it's also capable of sustaining itself? If we could come up with a solution to all those things, then I think we'd enter the space. And we have a lot of conversations, and there's a lot of interesting protocols for them. Now, if we did this, we would have a tsunami wave of attacks from the mainstream media. And, I've dealt with it, in the cryptocurrency space for 12 years. If you were a Bitcoin adherent, you're supporting white supremacy, selling drugs, part of a dark market, child pornography, this, terrorism, this. We've been called everything in this industry, especially in the first 4 years. The only media coverage you could look through at 99% was negative. When they mentioned Bitcoin, it was either a joke, a scam, a Ponzi scheme, or facilitating criminals. That was the only coverage for it. Meanwhile, we're sitting here trying to solve the social problems of humanity that these governments created. So expect that. If you create a centralized social media platform, they'll say you're a Nazi, terrorist sympathizer, promoting violence. In the meantime, the incumbents are the ones who are creating the violence. Their algorithms, the way they've structured the networks, actually radicalize people and divide people because they make money this way. And if we were to do a proper decentralized social network, it'd be the exact opposite. It would bring people together, it would de-radicalize people, and it would actually have proper information flows. But of course, it won't be reported that way. So I don't know if at this juncture in my life, I'm prepared to enter into that swamp and take that criticism. I've been through it once before with Bitcoin, and it wasn't as scrutinized as social media has become. That's a fight for one we're a little bigger, and we have a little bit more progress and a lot more sovereign partners.